All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. Welcome on this beautiful Wednesday morning. My name is Tumelo Bore. I'm one of the co-founders of Think Uhuru. And right now I have the pleasure of introducing our MC for today. I'm speaking about none other than Lindokuhle Mabaso. To list all of her accolades would require us to extend the program. Nonetheless, here are a few of them. She is a member of the International Golden Key Society, a former one-day leader contestant, and she is currently the best debater on the continent as per the Pan-African Debating Championships in Uganda. However, of all these achievements that I've listed above, another sits on the pinnacle of all she has achieved. It is that which makes her the revolutionary force we now know today. And she has endured a great deal of criticism because of it. And yet, in the face of unwavering animosity, she stood firm and she is on the right side of history. She is our president, our leader, in the Amasi with Salt family. I welcome you all to be embraced at a distance that is approved by the Department of Health, by the walking embodiment that is kindness, because in her hands we are safe, under her leadership we are led. Ladies and gentlemen, Lindo.
Good morning, everyone. Tumelo forgot to mention that I had also won a Nobel Peace Prize and was named Times Person of the Year 2006. True story, more specifically the latter. You can look me up. Cool, so for a while, there was great controversy pertaining the extent to which the ANC's negotiations and efforts toward the transition into the new dispensation could be credited as being of significant value, and that's just to put it mildly. This is especially because irrespective of the substance of the work done, as well as the intentions of the respective parties, it is considerably obvious to anyone who's aware of their existence that there is still great disparity in wealth, in access to basic necessities, as well as what was promised in the transition to the new dispensation and the present. This problem can be tied to state systems, right? Especially public administration. The popular narrative among post-colonial countries in the time that South Africa had its first democratic election was to smash the colonial state and build one that is just and equitable. However, most post-colonial states, including South Africa, opted to keep colonial systems of governance and public administration and instead make improvements through reform policies like the Redistribution and Development Program and Black economic empowerment, which at best have been reactionary measures that aimed at accommodating the people that the wealth of the state was supposed to be primarily redirected towards. One contribution made in response to this is that while the work done by especially the government during the transition and immediately after the transition was to facilitate the transition, right? By accepting provisions that made democratic and deracialized rule probable, which is to concede that the measures that were made by these or that were taken by these administrations were at best preliminary. While this is one response among many with room for considerable criticism as well, right? For instance, it doesn't quite capture why this is also a fitting response to the latest administrations, in which we have also seen a decline in the quality of public administration, as well as an adequate utility of socio-economic rights especially. It does, however, invite us to ask the question, what can we then do when we have the privilege to exercise the agency to do something? This question, I believe, is important for two reasons. Number one, the public can no longer reasonably rely on the government for timelessly enacted and substantive change. In fact, across the world, civil groups are progressively contributing more to systemic change in their states in this decade, especially because civil unrest tends to be a byproduct of injustice and inequality, right? The treatment action campaign case, for instance, is celebrated in South Africa not only for how the court ruled that mothers should have access to medication that enables them not to transmit the virus to their children, but also how civil protest made the matter such a broad interest that the government faced political pressure that necessitated it to respond. Number two is specifically tied to the significance of this day. There is a great responsibility on the youth to, while conceding to the failures of our government, be proactive in implementing solutions that are adequate and tailored to our time. A measure that is perhaps best captured by social entrepreneurship, right? This is the purposeful establishment of corporations that are premised on solving social issues and the recognition that it is in fact profitable to be tailored to aid or work towards aiding others. This, I believe, is perhaps what makes Think Uhuru an important entity in this time. Debating and public speaking and numerous academic cultural communities are not exempt from the problems that we experience in broad society. We know this, right? Like racism, wealth and access inequality, as well as intellectual insecurity, in fact, are present in numerous platforms that we tend to experience as cultural activities. However, the best of us likely look back at what we experienced or especially suffered and endeavor to come up with solutions that aim to prevent other people from experiencing those very terrible circumstances. And I think this is especially what the lads endeavor to accomplish through Think Uhuru. It is an establishment that essentially seeks to aid schools and individuals that have the potential but less access to qualitative resources to unlock their potential and claim space, particularly through giving learners tangible, transferable skills that make them impactful in society. What is also worth noting is that although Think Uhuru comes from the experiences of Neo, Tumelo, and Umar as debaters, it is effectively a thank you note to the space which has essentially built them and helped them develop character. It is also tied, or rather aimed, at ensuring that this kind of access and these kind of goals are also enacted in the numerous platforms that exist outside of debating. And so this goal essentially speaks to the numerous cultural spaces or cultural academic spaces that we have the potential to access, all of which we can excitedly look forward to hearing about as Neo, Dumelo, and Umar come up to present and a clear account of Think Uhuru. So with this, I'd then like to introduce the lads, and first is going to be Dumelo Bure. Dumelo is a co-founder and director of the public speaking division of Think Uhuru. He's currently studying a BA in politics and international relations at the University of Johannesburg. He's an accomplished public speaker, having excelled in numerous spaces, including the Toastmasters, as well as the Speech and Drama College and the South African University's Debating Championship. He was also a TEFL English speaker in France for nearly a year. His motivation in being part of founding Think Uhuru lies in the premise of his desire to equip the youth with the ability to articulate themselves and think critically, a very important skill in this particular decade. His passion stems from his sense of gratitude to how much debating, especially as a community, has contributed to his growth, as well as his character. Like, they're really sentimental lads. I'm assuming you can get that by this point. Nonetheless, due to the aforementioned, he believes that it is right that as Think Uhuru, they collectively give back to the community that has built them as individuals by specifically contributing to the growth and evolution process of the community at large. I'm also happy to report that Dumelo is the Secretary General of the Amasi with Salt Association. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly help me as I welcome Dumelo back to the podium.
Thank you, leadership. Thank you, leadership. We are observed. I think before we unpack, or rather I unpack, what Think Uhuru means, I think it's important that we discuss with you guys what our company aims to achieve and what our company stands for. Think Uhuru is an innovative platform that seeks to elevate the voices of youth in Africa, and we offer bespoke services including the facilitation of public speaking, debating, and leadership and development. Our primary purpose is to achieve two important goals. One, to open up established spaces for debating and public speaking. And the second goal is to reinvent these aforementioned platforms to be more collaborative for sustainable growth and development on various tiers. However, more importantly, a large contributing factor to why we thought of creating this company was, as Lindo said, to pay homage to the spaces that created us and the spaces that have aided our development as speakers and as individuals. Whilst understanding, there is still room, a great deal of room, for us to disrupt these spaces and create more avenues for growth and development for the youth discourse in South Africa. And this is what we aim to achieve with Think Uhuru. And at this juncture, you might be asking yourself, what does Think Uhuru mean? Or rather, more importantly, what does it mean to Think Uhuru? So during the early days of ideation, the intention and the purposes of the company came rather easy to us. That was the easy building blocks for what we aimed to achieve. The last frontier we faced was naming. And I think names are very important because with a name, you occupy space. You lay claim to your existence. You start to occupy a physical world as opposed to the world that exists in your head. So in thinking of a name, we thought around imagery around discourse or imagery around growth. We were toying around the idea of scorched earth because that's where new buds grow, toying around the idea of a sunset. But we had to introspect in finding a name. We had to delve deeper within ourselves to find what does public speaking, debating, what do they mean to us and what have they given to us? And through that, we found an affinity with the word Uhuru. Its etymology is from Swahili and it means freedom. Because to be able to speak is to be able to articulate freedom, is to be able to claim space and allow your ideas to exist within that space. So in paying homage to the spaces that aided our growth, we recognize that these spaces also exist here in this continent. And Uhuru has a clear link to that. And we never want to forget, from when we branch out, where we first laid root. And in saying that, there is a beautiful quote from Mr. Keating in Dead Poets Society, in which he says, to quote from Whitman, "O me, O life, of these questions, of these recurring, of these endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these? O me, O life." Answer, that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the beautiful play goes on and that you may contribute a verse. That the beautiful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. So in this, and in the art of articulation and discourse, we say that we are present. We say that we exist in this moment, amongst our peers, in front of all of you beautiful people, that we are here. And we are nothing without the skill to articulate ourselves. Now, what does think mean in context of Think Uhuru? And it speaks to, in ways, of how critical thinking goes in tandem with articulation and is a byproduct of healthy discourse. We wanted the name to speak to this, a platform that allows for discourse to flow and water the seeds of critical thinking and healthy engagement amongst the youth. And this is what we got from the space, and as a gift we continue to cherish and want to nurture in generations that come long after us. So ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join this vibrant new team. We invite you to watch along as we attempt to innovate the space and to watch us grow. And lastly, we invite you all to think Uhuru.
Thank you so much, Dumelo. I especially appreciate that Dumelo emphasizes the ability to articulate ourselves. It's very important that when we engage with spaces and communities like debating and public speaking, we realize that they aren't only competitive spaces in the tournament exclusively, right? They're important for the sustainable ability to always be able to articulate ourselves where it matters most. And so thank you very much once again for that amazing account of how the name Think Uhuru came to be. I would now like to proceed to welcoming the second guest and one of the co-founders, being Neo Muswewu. Neo is also co-founder and specifically the director of the Leadership and Development Division of Think Uhuru, having obtained a BA in Politics, Philosophy, and Economics from the University of Johannesburg. Neo's motivation for founding Think Uhuru lies within his desire to maximize the incredible opportunity to have direct impact on the youth in a meaningful way by building a unique knowledge-based company. Neo is also a seasoned debater, which is what all the debaters struggling to retire call themselves in order to garner a sense of respect. But he's also essentially just very much accomplished, being the co-founder of one of the biggest, the co-founder of the UJ Debate series. He's the inaugural champion of Queer Open in 2019, as well as a grand finalist in one of the biggest debating opens hosted by the Wits University. The Josie Rumble, almost forgot that, how could I? Nonetheless, he won, he was a finalist in 2019. He has also built a formidable experience, right, working with social entrepreneurship-based companies in tech, right? These includes, for instance, numerous startup scenes in Johannesburg alongside companies such as Biosoft, as well as Spaza Media, Simong, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, as well as APSA. I'm happy to report that as of this morning, he's also a newly conscripted member of the Sufferers Fan Club. So you're welcome, sir.
It's a bit shaky here, eh? Okay, I'm just going to stand over here. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. First of all, can I say what an honor it is to have everyone here? And it's a great privilege to be speaking to you guys today. Out of sincerity, I think it should just be very clear that the three of us take this responsibility very seriously. For us, it's more than just the imperative of just starting a business. It's about changing spaces and ensuring that we can create a long-lasting legacy. The idea behind Think Uhuru, as Dumelo had said, was to really inculcate people with critical thinking skills. But I guess I want to extend this by speaking a bit more about what we're specifically going to be doing and how we'd like to do that. The intention about the company, really, when it started, is that we noticed a gap in the South African space. A lot of the students that are debating today, that are in competitive spaces around critical thinking and soft skills, so to speak, are not able to access the, quote, privileged spaces. They're not able to access, quote, the spaces that require people to have additive funds and access to facilities. At the moment, there is an assumption that this needs to remain the same. It cannot remain the same because the critical skills gap that's going to exist in the future will require cognitive skills, the ability to think, the ability to speak, the ability to reason. There is also an underlying open secret that exists, that a lot of people that do debating and public speaking are more likely and have the propensity to achieve better results in schools, have the ability to achieve better results for selection courses in universities. So beyond it just being an idealistic idea of what we want to do, it really is a practical solution to an existing problem of access for young people. Our partners will be strategic partners in business, there'll be strategic partners in government, and there'll be strategic partners in schools. Our intention is to provide B2B mechanisms where people can actually pursue Think Uhuru and say they've identified, say, example, 500 young people that they would like to have be trained for public speaking and debating. In so doing, we'll create actionable plans that we can actually devise to ensure those people go through an incubation program with our products. We believe that Think Uhuru is not only a disruptive force for public speaking and debating, but it's also a symbolic one. Because in many instances, many of the debating societies that have been created in South Africa, while being for-profit, have been deeply exclusive in the way in which they have their own epistemic worldviews. We believe that the idea of Think Uhuru should be about introducing Southern and African epistemologies into South African debating and ensuring that we create a more representative philosophy around public speaking and debating. And further by that, the Leadership and Development Unit serves that role. We're also trying to create leaders. There are many institutions, development finance, governments like the city of Johannesburg, that are lying on dead capital, willing to help schools and universities to develop 21st century leaders with contemporary skill sets. I do not think there's any other company at the moment that is thinking the same way that we are. And I hope that we can have you guys along for the ride. And that's all I'm going to say today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Noah, for a very interesting account of what the company intends to do, especially with respect to the unique approach that it brings, as well as the hope for sustainable growth, for sustainable goals that get to affect a lot more people in the long run. I'd now like to welcome the final guest, or rather the final co-founder, which is Umar Bakas. Umar is the co-founder as well as the director of the debating division of Think Uhuru. Having obtained a BSc Honours in Construction and Project Management from the University of the Witwatersrand, Umar's motivation for founding Think Uhuru stems from his desire to proliferate the debating space of South Africa with accessibility and to elevate the sport to a universal level of excellence, something that can be testament to the work that he's also largely done through the Wits Debating Union. He's also an internationally awarded debater and adjudicator in his own right. This includes accomplishments that include, for instance, being the chief adjudicator of the Pan-African University Debating Championship and previously the chair of the grand final. He is also the South African National University Debating Championship Council vice chairperson, as well as the Pan-African National University, University Debating Championship Council Vice Chairperson and the South African Schools Debating Board Vice President. He has also convened the biggest debating open in Africa, being Josie Rumble, which I properly remembered this time around, and the biggest online debating tournament that is also very much respected for being the most accessible one in comparison to the ones that have existed. He is also an incredible friend. So him and I have a mutual friend who hosted a birthday party for me a year before him and I even became friends. But somehow he holds that against me because irrespective of the fact that he had no business being there because I did not know him, he's simply just not okay with the fact that he wasn't invited to my birthday party. Nonetheless, in my books, that makes him a great friend. Everyone, please welcome Umar Bakas.
All right, thank you so much, Linda, for that introduction. Much to the dismay of my mother, I've never really mastered the art of speech writing. I am very much a debater through and through, so I am planning to just give this speech off the cuff, and I've already got my timer ready, as debaters do. I think this day is something that I've been dreading a little bit for the longest time because it means that we're finally responsible for the vast ideas that we've been talking about for years. And I think what I was asked to speak about, namely, was the motivation behind specifically why we chose to use this vehicle for what we're trying to do, or what we're trying to accomplish. So the last year has been quite a tough one for most people, but it's oddly been a really successful one for discourse and student development through things like debate and public speaking. You've heard in passing that I was part of the team that established the largest and most accessible online debating championship. It was called Uhuru Worlds. It had 48 countries and over 300 teams from across the world. And I think more importantly than all of that, it was free. It was something that cost nothing and was dependent on the goodwill of individuals from a vastly diverse backgrounds. And that was what gave me the faith to undertake this journey with my co-founders. It gave me the understanding that individuals at their core are able to do two things. Firstly, they're able to give a massive, or put forward a massive amount of goodwill. And I think as much as we are a company, we're very much trying to deliver two things. Firstly, it's the creation of an ecosystem of individuals who will, over time, create a visible and tangible tide of change within society. Because our first goal when we set it out, the lunch between the three of us, when we decided that this was the route we wanted to take, it was like, so what's the overarching goal? And the goal was to change the world. But being a student of project management, I tried to step back a little bit and see where we could go, where we could sort of approach that from a more reasonable angle. And I think the initial onus was that also we had to eat, and so it's also great to be employed. Again, much to my mom's dismay, I have tried to sort of thrown away my 2 degrees and opted into entrepreneurship. But ultimately, I think, and again, this really speaks to our faith and conviction in these projects, the ability of young South Africans, and really the African youth as we've experienced it through our journey as debaters and public speakers, is something that has given us tremendous faith, but also tremendous courage. And that's the overarching principles that will guide us in this journey. These are the motivations of Think Uhuru. These are the, ultimately, hopefully, the tales that we hope to tell over the next few years. And in a few, or rather, after we've allowed our wonderful guests to speak to us, we will give you a little bit more clarity on how we aim to go forward into the future. So thank you much. Thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate you. And yeah, we're also really appreciative of all our guests who have taken the time to be here.
Also, can I just say that I feel seen with this elevation situation that they have going on for me, because wow, hey? But nonetheless, I think just to summarize perhaps the session of the speeches and the guests is that it's very important that we celebrate companies that are very much oriented to wanting to make an impact in society, companies that exist with the premise to want to tailor their efforts towards the aid of individuals. And so I believe that if anything, much that is great can be expected from, firstly, Think Uhuru, but especially tied to the sincere intentions of its co-founders. That said, I'd now like to proceed to the segment where we introduce and hear from our honorary guests. And we're first going to begin with Sohaila. So Sohaila is really amazing. Firstly, she is an LLM graduate, and anyone who's doing law kind of knows that that's very much something that is 100% worth celebrating. But secondly, if you thought that that itself was just a great accomplishment, she's also a constitutional clerk at the Constitutional Court of South Africa. Sohaila, please come grace us with your excellence.
Hi, everyone. So, as you might have realized from my bio, I'm a bit of a traitor and self-identify more as a lawyer than as a debater. And so I hope that you'll all bear with me for a little, because I'm actually going to start off by talking a little bit about the law, and hopefully you'll understand why I think that's relevant to what we're trying to do here today. So the story starts, of course, during apartheid, which we all know was horrifically racist and sexist, but many of us don't discuss was also incredibly homophobic. The apartheid government criminalized same-sex relationships. It ran conversion therapy programs that we now recognize as brutal forms of torture, and it overall promoted an ultra-religious, ultra-restrictive version of gender and of relationships, interpersonal relationships. And so, at the time, gay movements, unfortunately, were not very effective. They were very white, very wealthy, and very apolitical. They were, in fact, more like social clubs than political movements. Until we have the influence of queer and anti-apartheid icons like Simon Colley, who imbue the gay rights movement with the spirit of the anti-apartheid movement, and who now change this movement so that it is not just against homophobia, but against racism, and operates alongside and within the broader liberation movement. And so, as apartheid began to fall, this movement started to think about how to secure rights and protection under the incoming constitutional dispensation. And in doing so, they formed a broad coalition of all the different disparate civil society organizations, grassroots activists, under one umbrella organization called the National Coalition for Gay and Lesbian Equality. And something that they did that I think is incredibly interesting, and this is where it starts to get, I think, a little more relevant to all of us here today, was they realized that they did not have the support to launch a program of mass politics and protest. And so what they did instead was craft a very careful, strategic program of legal and political activism. So step one is a narrative, and they craft this narrative of sexual orientation and gender identity as being very similar to race, in that these are uncontrollable facets of a person that lead to untold discrimination. And this kind of narrative was incredibly successful with members of the liberation movement at the time who sympathized with the struggle of gays and lesbians and other members of the LGBT plus community, which was unheard of at the time, right? Because of that really careful narrative. The next step then was to secure protection under the interim constitution. And so a very careful lobbying process began, lobbying members of parliament, which at the time included the National Party, to include sexual orientation as one of the prohibited grounds of discrimination in the Equality Clause. And so what they did was look at each person they had to lobby and craft a particular strategy based on that person's interests, their fears, their prejudices. For example, National Party members were obviously approached by white members of the National Coalition. And they were very, very careful to point out, to make explicit that this protection, this discrimination clause wasn't going to lead to something outlandish in the future, like same-sex marriage. No way. This is just to prevent discrimination, to prevent violence. And it was successful, right? We became the first country in the world to prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. Then building on this victory comes a series of court cases. Now, the coalition understood that challenging for same-sex marriage then would have been disastrous. They would have been laughed out the court. And so they started by challenging the criminalization of sodomy, as it was called at the time. And they won that case, and sodomy is decriminalized. And next, the courts recognized same-sex life partnerships. And next, the courts recognized the ability of same-sex life partners to inherit from one another, to maintain one another, to adopt together. And finally, by the time the National Coalition, or rather people supported by the National Coalition, approached the Constitutional Court challenging the illegality of same-sex marriage, the jurisprudence of the courts on the equality of LGBTQ plus persons, on the importance of their family structures and their dignity, was so great that it was inevitable that the court would legalize same-sex marriage. So why did I tell you this story? I tell it to you because, as a lawyer, it's very tempting to look at this and say, that was a victory of the courts. That's how we learn about it in law school. That was a victory of human rights and constitutionalism and justice. And I think that's how most of us, even non-lawyers, think about it. But when you learn the history, you realize that it was actually the victory of a very, very clever group of activists and lawyers and politically minded people who seized like a pivotal moment of our country's history, and with that incredible timing, used the power of discourse, of communication, of lobbying, of argument to achieve what at the time people thought was impossible, and what unfortunately in many parts of the world is still impossible. So I haven't achieved a victory yet on the same level of the free judgment, but personally can attest to the fact that being involved in debating and public speaking in moot court competitions, that level of discourse and argument has brought just untold benefits to me. It has given me access to opportunities I would never have otherwise had access to. It has given me skills that are integral to who I am as a person and as a lawyer and as a writer now. And I think that really is what we're all here for. That's what they're trying to do with Think Uhuru, is to recognize that personally we can grow so incredibly much through discourse, through the kinds of skills that debating and public speaking give you, but maybe even more importantly, we can genuinely change the world. We can achieve the next free, we can achieve the impossible. So I'm so glad to be here today, and I am so proud of what you're all doing. I wish you the very, very best.
Thank you so much to Sohaila in absentia, but I think nonetheless a very important sentiment that came to mind as she was making the very amazing point that she did, is that where the word of a king is, there is power, right? We ought to never take for granted how impactful speech is, especially when we endeavor to use our capacity to critically think, to analyze for genuinely good efforts that are aimed at making a sincere change. That said, I would now like to welcome two speakers who are uniquely important in this conversation or this day because they happen to have benefited from the work of one of the co-founders in his capacity as a coach. And so I'd like to welcome firstly Hamida Malik and secondly Nivaria Naidu. Ladies, you are welcome to come to the podium and share with us on your experience with Dumelo Bure. Thank you so much.
Umuntu, Kumuntu, Kubantu, an African proverb. You're probably wondering what it means, but I'm not going to be telling you what it means just yet. A few weeks ago, I was asked a question. What does Youth Day mean to me? I came up with an answer that was almost predictable. It means power, freedom, protest. But that was never really my meaning of Youth Day, or my idea of what it is to me. To say that question bothered me would be an understatement. It was engraved into my mind and I didn't even have an answer. But that all changed when I bought a book called Everyday Ubuntu. Living Better Together, the African Way. Written by Mungi Gomane, the granddaughter of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I'm not a fan of self-help books, but other than the bright-colored cover that made my eyes dance along to the patterns, the word Ubuntu caught my eye. I've heard the word before in African proverbs and many speeches and poems, but I never thought about it, about what it really means. Ubuntu is a Xhosa word from South Africa, meaning that each person's humanity is bound up with the humanity of others. It is a philosophy that expresses a universal bond. I am only because you are. That's what intrigued me. That sentence was the key to unlocking my perspective and understanding in Ubuntu. But why Ubuntu? To me, there isn't a more perfect word to describe the Soweto uprising. The reason we celebrate Youth Day. Ubuntu has a different meaning for every community and person. My meaning of Ubuntu is the connection our humanity has to others. It's a connection every single one of the 20,000 students that took part of the Soweto uprising had. It's a feeling of unity that can only be described as ineffable. Youth Day was never just a protest. It was a fight for humanity, an act of true Ubuntu. I am only because you are. Youth Day is an acknowledgement of the power of Ubuntu and its effect on our people. The Soweto uprising happened 45 years ago, but the fight never ended. Ubuntu of our people never died. It's a never-ending feeling that will stay with us even after we have died. From a young age, we are encouraged to be the best, to be number one. But that is an ideology that destroys the meaning of Ubuntu. It destroys the power of our togetherness. But Youth Day changes that. It turns a simple and effective ideology into one of fault. Youth Day is the courage us as the youth have when we speak up and share our opinion or when we fight for a difference or cause. Youth Day is Ubuntu, and we are part of it. Umuntu, Kumuntu, Gabantu. It means a person is a person through other persons. Thank you.
I would like to start off by telling you about an old African proverb. Every morning in Africa, a springbuck wakes up and knows that it must outrun the fastest lion in order to survive. Every morning in Africa, a lion wakes up and knows it must run faster than the slowest springbuck in case it starves. It doesn't matter whether you're the lion or the springbuck. When the sun comes up, you better be running. To me, Youth Day serves as a reminder of what it means to be South African. Because South Africans, at their very core, are fighters. This is proved time and time again throughout our history. But the Soweto uprising was a powerful and fundamental moment in that history. Today, we not only commemorate the heroes of that day, but we use it as a reminder of the power that the youth possess and their effective use of mass-based protest. That even what may be seen as the softest voices of society, when brought together, can echo so loud it can ignite a revolution. The Soweto uprising in many ways was the beginning of the end of apartheid. But today, it serves as a reminder, specifically to the youth, that change is possible through small action. That we are not forced to obey a system we do not believe in. The students of the Soweto uprising fought the system, so that today, we can rebuild a better one. As far as we've come, change is still very much necessary. Today is a reminder that we can fight, just as they did 45 years ago. Fight the microaggressions, the racism, the huge wealth disparities, the fight against our women. In Soweto, the Soweto uprising has taught us that these realities are not ones that we are forced to accept, but rather causes that we can unite to change. Take these shackles off my feet so that I can dance. It's so important that we look at the shackles holding back today's youth. The simplest failure would be the right to education. In South Africa, education is still not free or accessible to the masses. I keep asking myself, where's the fire that ignited the South African youth in 1976? This is our heritage as young South Africans. While my parents are proud and nostalgic of their contribution to resistance in the past, I am faced with the question, what will spur resistance and serve as the ultimate removal of the shackles for our future? What will inspire our youth to dance? Every single one of us is a child of this country, and it isn't a perfect one, but it is home. I strongly believe as South Africans, it is our struggle that unites us. Not just to each other, but to all the South Africans that have resisted, past and present. We are united by our fight, our need for reform and retribution. There is only one word to describe a unity like that: Ubuntu. I am what I am because of who we are. We as a generation are what we are and are capable of what we are capable of because of the generations that have preceded us. It is so vital that we respect and honor that. We owe it not only to them, but to every single generation that comes after us to remember the power that we as the youth possess, the impact our words can have, and the change we are able to create. So what does Youth Day mean to me? It is simply a reminder of responsibility I carry as a daughter of this country, and that a country of fighters, and that the fight is not over yet. Today reminds me that just as the lion and the springbuck, when the sun comes up tomorrow, we all better be running. Thank you.
The question that Nivaria posed towards the end of her speech, as well as Hamida's narration of Ubuntu, honestly bring to mind the understanding that to couple, firstly, the question on our efforts at resistance, and specifically to take our efforts at resistance rather than to couple that with Ubuntu can only be something that turns out well. Because again, when we're oriented to take our efforts and ensure that they have the specific outcome of being communitarian in value, that is a value that is great because it far supersedes our conceptions of ourselves, our conceptions of what wealth and success looks like. And so to know that the youth in the present, especially in their generation, is oriented in this mindset is honestly something that, once again, is worth celebrating. That said, I'd now like to proceed to invite our next guest, and that is Mr. Oliver Dixon. Oliver is a noted political analyst who once put me on blast of the national election advert's long story. He is also a columnist, as well as a host and MC, and a former university debate champion. Oliver, you are welcome to take the podium.
Whoa. I think this is for you, Liakwe.
Shut up, I need you.
I can stand next to this thing, right? I don't have to move that. Hi, everybody. My name is Oliver Dixon. Great honor for me to be here. We only have 5 minutes. So much I want to touch on. Firstly, it is an absolute pleasure for me to be here and a great honor because while I'm in no way invested in Think Uhuru, and while I'm in no way part of the organization, I feel like the organization brings to the realization a dream I long had. Anyone who's ever done university debating will tell you that it digs a hole in your pocket. It's incredibly expensive to participate in. You have to travel every other weekend. You have to pay registration fees to all these tournaments. You have to pay your accommodation, and it's just a shit ton of money. Excuse my language. And so one of the ways to afford to participate in the sport, because after the first year or two, your parents cut you off. One of the ways to afford to participate in the sport is to coach debating. And I'm lucky that I was in Johannesburg and that I was able to coach at a select few private schools in Johannesburg. At first, I made enough money to start going on debating tournaments. Then I changed my business model and made enough money to start paying my school fees. And that was kind of a big deal. And I thought, hey, perhaps this could be bigger than just like, a hobby sport that gives you like 250 Rand on a Wednesday to travel to, I don't know, Yando on the Saturday. And I grew my coaching enterprise to a point where I was able to hire 2 other people, and we were able to expand this. And just as I kicked into expansion gear, the bug of adulthood bit me, and I had to subject my life to industry. And I was lucky as a result of my debating background to be able to have, in the short 27 years I've been alive, 3 dream jobs. And I want to speak about them. Before I speak about that, Think Uhuru then takes that dream that I had about expanding debating as far and wide as possible as I possibly could, discourse, critical thinking, public speaking, to select few private schools in Johannesburg, to every corner of South Africa, every corner of the continent, and every corner of the globe. And I wish you guys luck. I'll be here every step of the way to guide, to hold your hand, to offer advice, and to assist where I can. I'll always make time for it. And I want you to know that you can knock on my door at every moment, sometimes quite literally like Neo does. And every bit of premium whiskey and every bit of premium wine in my house has been drank up by Neo, seeking advice. So good luck, Neo. Good luck, Dumelo. Good luck, Omar. I wish you guys all the best, and thank you for living my dream. Now, I've had 3 dream jobs in my life. And I want to start with the first, and they're all as a result of the value proposition of Uhuru, Think Uhuru. And I want to leave off where Suhela started. I had the privilege and honor of working in government as a communications director and advisor to a minister. My baptism into government was a baptism of fire. I worked perhaps for the most controversial minister at the time, and the controversy that made it to the media unfortunately did not show the true depth of the work we were doing. So Hela narrated to us the history, at least, of the gay rights movement in South Africa, from being a completely marginalized, ostracized group of people to where they are, the rights and protections they enjoy today. But perhaps that journey is not complete. when I got into government, I was privileged and honored to work on two sets of policy and legislative reform. The first was for gay couples to get married by any commissioner in Home Affairs. Up until a year ago, a commissioner based on their religious denomination and religious inclinations could refuse to marry a gay couple at Home Affairs. That is now illegal. They can't do that. If they do that, they get fired. I was privileged enough to work on that piece of legislative reform. And the second I worked on was on gender recognition rights, or a gender recognition policy in South Africa. What it simply means is that if you're a trans individual in South Africa, you were born and assigned a gender by your parents, hospital, and the country, the government, you'd have to jump through at least 17 different hoops to be able to change your gender and reassign it to the gender you identify by. What we were able to do is to shorten the span for which that is to happen. And the bureaucracy around it excluded poor trans people in this country, disenfranchised trans people in this country. And it is now very simple to do that. And as a result of, again, Think Uhuru's value proposition, I was able to cultivate a skill that allowed me to work and add value in that space as far as policy and legislative reform is concerned. I do not come from a law background. I do not come from a social sciences background. I do not come from any sort of soft sciences background. I studied chemistry. I can tell you about acids, bases, endothermic and exothermic reactions. I can tell you about analytical chemistry. I can tell you about compounds. But ordinarily, I should not be able to talk to you about policy reform in government. And that was my second dream job, really. And the value proposition of Think Uhuru was able to do that. Again, they're living the dream I had and was unable to take to the top. The first dream job I had was in the media. I remember in 2017 or 18, can't remember too well. I stood in the kitchen of my apartment with two of my best friends, and I told them, I want to work on radio because I want to take this skill set of debating and make it as national as possible. I want to help South Africans argue better. And I think the best way to do that is through the media. I want to get a job in radio. And I was going to start a podcast. And 2 months after that, I got a call and someone offered me a radio job. And I've since not looked back. And again, I was able to use the skill set of critical thinking, discourse engagement, and debating, public speaking in that space. And so I don't think we should take for granted the impact that has. And it is through my work in the media that I was able to get a job in government, in a national government office advising a minister. And from any given day, I would go from writing a speech for a minister to present to stakeholders as part of my job as a director of communications and stakeholder management and engagement, to writing a speech for the minister to present to a presentation for the minister to present to Parliament, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, the National Council of Provinces, or whatever relevant body summoned the minister there for that occasion, or helping the minister prepare notes to update the president on the work of the ministry and the department, to coordinate with other members of cabinet, and crafting speeches for a minister to present to business, to present to civil society, to present to academia, and swinging between all of that. I think I got a unique view of what it is that South Africa needs as far as skill sets are concerned. It is shocking that you would walk into a room with someone who works in the upper echelons of business, but are incredibly divorced from the reality of people on the ground because they forgot how to listen, they forgot how to engage, and those are skill sets we need. So while Think Uhuru gives you testimonials of two fantastic young high school public speakers, this is a skill set that I hope that they can expand into the crevices of corporate South Africa, so that even the people who truly make decisions about the direction of our economy are able to really listen. You know, oftentimes when you speak to a CEO of a multinational corporation, as I do in my day-to-day job now, advising industry, business, and corporate South Africa on policy, political risk, strategy, and lobby, oftentimes they are so divorced from the reality of South Africa. They view us as numbers and sets of data, but not as human beings with stories, lives, and experiences. And so you'll often hear them throw around terms like, oh, unemployment rate in this country is 74%. And you'll hear them talk about the impact of a economic contraction quarter on quarter. But that kind of speak does not allow for the humanization of people who are unemployed, the depression they live with, the inhumanity they live with, and the sheer and utter humiliation that joblessness subjects you and poverty subjects you to in this country. And it is only really through a skill set that is holistic as far as academia is concerned, as far as industry is concerned, as far as government is concerned, but having the skill to be able to craft an argument, to tell a story, and to build a narrative that allows for everybody to be felt heard, seen, and engaged, that truly we can take conversations forward in this country. At the core of it all, I consider myself a conversationalist, and I'm honored to be able to play and work in that space. And I look forward to working with Think Uhuru in that space. And I'm telling you about the 3 dream jobs I had, not to tell you I've lived a glorious life, because I really haven't. But I tell you about it to tell you what the value proposition of those organizations is capable of, to tell you about what the scale of the impact of those organizations will achieve, and to tell you about why you need to stick around, hold their hands, and make sure that at any point in time, if you get a call from Tumelo, Uma, or Neo, that you answer the call, that you make yourself available, but that you also pray for them, love them, support them. Business is not easy. They're not always going to be smiling. And oftentimes when they're not smiling, just buy them a cup of coffee. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Look at my Secretary General, guys. How full. Thank you so much, Oliver. I think my favorite part among many in Oliver's speech is that it really shows that debating capacitates individuals beyond firstly what they typically study, but in order for them to be really meaningful contributors in diverse fields. Oliver is in radio, Oliver is writing speeches for ministers, but he started as a person who typically was just a chemistry student, right? So debating really is important and does capacitate us, which is again why it is such an incredible thing that these lads have decided to make it as accessible as possible to numerous individuals. I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, who is Lehakwe Masedi. Lehakwe obtained a BCom Law, LLB, and LLM with specialization in international economic law from the University of the Free State. Again, anyone who's done the law thing knows that's mad impressive. Secondly, she is a former award-winning debater and internationally ranked debate adjudicator. Former, not seasoned, because she knows how to let things go. Additionally, Lehakwe is currently a candidate attorney at a leading corporate law firm, and her interests include radical Black feminism and 1960s jazz. So I'd like for all of us to just kindly rise and sing Miss Nina Simone's Feeling Good as she comes to the podium. I'm kidding. Birds flying high.
Oh, yikes. Okay. It works. Woo! I'm wearing heels. Okay, that's fine. I'm good. We're good. Hi, everyone. I'd like to first start by noting that I actually beat Neo in that 2019 final in the biggest open in Africa. But to get to what we're really speaking about today, I think the importance of debating and discourse as someone who's been to university, I think the advantage of, I think, firstly, getting over the hurdle of making it into a university in South Africa is that you get into a space that is very free thinking, where you're able to express a lot of your opinions. I think being at university was the first time I saw openly transgender people. It was the first time I saw more than one disabled person at a time. It was the first time I saw gay and lesbian couples being open more than, more than not. So I think what university, I think, puts you in an environment where you are forced as a person who comes from any kind of background to confront, I think, what a lot of people's real lives actually look like, and how, the world in general, the world outside of the free thinking space of university, where you have to hide parts of yourself. I think that's the first advantage. Getting into, I think, university debating, for me, I owe a great debt to university debating, because I think what that does for you, what that does for the way that you're able to form opinions that are informed not just by how you feel, because, it is important, I think, in a humanity aspect, to feel empathy for individuals who are persecuted, to feel empathy for individuals who are homosexual but can't express it, to feel empathy for individuals who are transgender but can't get gender-affirming surgery, who get thrown out by their families, who get laughed at by individuals all the time. That's very important. But I think what debating and competitive university debating does is that it forces you to really critically analyze why so many people have bad opinions and what you can do. Because, there are good and bad, and everything is black and white, unlike, what most people like you to think. But I think it helps you to confront in the real world, when you do meet someone who is homophobic, when you do meet someone who is racist, not just to say that, well, you need to see people as equal because we're all people, but I think to really be able to have language and informed opinions about why it is that is wrong for you to think that way. I think that skill is invaluable. But I think also, as someone who very much, likes to think of themselves as, having been an activist, a product of Fees Must Fall, I think there's a lot that taking rubber bullets does to you, and does to your opinions about the world. But I think I do feel like I defected by going into corporate, because corporate is definitely every single thing that every single conviction that you have about the world and about poverty and about women, I think it is the direct opposite of that. And I think that, what helped me really navigate getting into corporate was, I think, although it isn't outwardly racist and outwardly sexist anymore, I think a lot of the microaggressions still exist. You wouldn't believe that a lot of, even in big corporates that we advise, I say we, obviously my seniors, I print and make files, that we advise on, is that they would still refer to black women that they appoint on their boards as transformation candidates, in those exact words. They would still, I think, talk down to black lawyers who give them advice, even though that's the most senior person in the room. They would still, I think, always, I was on a call just 2 weeks ago with these tax specialists from Botswana, and our client, who were 3 white men, obviously, kept almost harassing him, and at every single turn would turn to the associate from our side to confirm that the advice was correct, to confirm that that's, the position that we need to take. So I think that, being in that kind of space every single day and not exploding is one thing. But I think it also, the ability to stand up for yourself, the ability to, I think, play the room in the way that you would in a debating round, where you see that, well, I have 3 white male judges, 2 of them are from Australia, 1 is from America, so I need to play up my preppy Johannesburg accent. I need to tie up my hair. I need to look neat, and I need to speak in a certain way. You know, that kind of skill, because I know that I need those points to win that round. Those same skills transfer when you get to corporate, and you know that even though you would want, you know, to speak a certain way and to outwardly, you know, express your communist and feminist views, I think speaking, you know, in a language that is palatable to that environment while still making, I think, the point that, you know, you're able to stand up for yourself, that you are intelligent, that you understand the instruction you've been given, that you are able to write memos that are intelligible because you're more than just a messenger or a printing person. I think that is really what I think in the critical thinking, in the ability to express yourself. Now, that is really the value that debating gives you when you do get into corporate, which is, you know, a really difficult space. Because also you do have to see corporate like any other environment that you'd be in through your own eyes. So, you know, if you grow up being black and a woman and with everything that comes with, every single thing you're going to see through that lens, and it makes you, you know, very aware, I think, of how much the world hates you, how much the world hates your existence, how much the world hates, you know, the fact that you're able to express yourself, the fact that you're able to stand up for yourself. And, you know, debating really helps you to have the language, I think, to deal with those difficulties, definitely. So I think that people who get into competitive university debating, one, again, by being able to get over the hurdle to get into university and complete a degree, or to be in university for any number of years, like most debaters do. I did a master's purely for the reason of having a year I could just debate and not attend class, which was great. But I won't tell my mother that because she paid for it. But I think, you know, you get over that hurdle, but then the second hurdle that you get over, like Oliver said, is that debating is very expensive as a sport. I took up 2 part-time jobs from second year. I'd miss class to go like coach or tutor just so I could have money to like travel at the end of the year or anything like that. But I think those are very huge hurdles that the majority of South Africans don't have, the majority of Black South Africans don't have. You know, it's a very, very, very much a minority of individuals who even get to do just a bachelor's degree or even a diploma. So I think that what Think Uhuru does is, I think, expand the ability for people to attain those skills, because I think that what people do have access to is, you know, going to a school more than perhaps going to university. So I think if you're able to impart those skills, if you're able to give young schoolgirls, I think the skills that I wish I had as a 13-year-old in an all-white school, in a conservative Christian school, to be able to speak up for myself or stand up for myself, is that although you have the conviction, a lot of the time you don't have the way to articulate what that conviction is. So I'd like to think that I was a feminist from when I was 4 years old, and I'd beat boys up on the playground, you know, because they wouldn't let us play with them or whatever. But I think that kind of conviction of being able to see, because any person is able to see the injustice that you face, and you're able to calculate, even from a very young age, that, well, I'm not allowed to do this because I'm Black. I'm not allowed to do this because I'm a girl. But getting that language and being able to express that language in an intelligible way, in an argumentative way, I think is invaluable. And I'm so thankful that a lot of young South Africans that I came up through debating with are really trying to increase, I think, the reach that this kind of skill has. And like Oliver and Suhela said, I mean, as people who owe a lot of our own success to the skills that debating gave us, I think we're very much behind these guys. Now, I had a couple of calls with Neo myself about, you know, what he was trying to do, and I'm also very much behind it, because I really am a testament of what being able to articulate yourself, what being able to think critically about things, what being able to have empathy for, you know, the world outside of yourself really does for a person, really does for the kind of value that you bring, not just for yourself and being able to navigate and being able to attain some kind of success, but I think the value that that brings to the people that you're able to interact with. And if you're able to change 1 or 2 people's minds, I think you've done quite a big job. So well done, and I really wish you nothing but the best. Thank you.
I think a very important part of Lehakwe's speech, one of my favorites once again, is very much on the power of a clearly articulated narrative, right? Because it's one thing to speak, but people tend to be very attracted to a narrative that helps them understand why they were misconceived, or, well, no, that's not the right word, why they had a misconception, and therefore to appreciate better why what you're relaying is probably the better way to do things. Because we seldom achieve very great progress when people are in a position where they feel entitled to defend a stance that doesn't in any way help us make commendable progress. And so a clearly articulated narrative is very important, and I think Lehakwe captures that really, really incredibly. I would now like to welcome our final guest, Dr. Saths Cooper. Dr. Saths Cooper is firstly a psychologist and an academic, but he is also a freedom fighter and an activist. I find it very interesting that he noted those two things to be different, but nonetheless, we are very happy to have you on the podium and welcome you as our honorary guest, sir.
Thank you very much. It is my distinct pleasure to be with you here and to share some thoughts about what you're doing at this critical point in our lives, in our country. As I was driving here, I heard a few people commenting on SAFM about this day. And basically, they ranged from bitterness at why so much attention is being focused on youth. Why are we worrying about youth? And I'm going to deal with that shortly. And to a statement which I was pleasantly shocked by, and that is that the 76 leadership, the exiles, and the Robben Islanders, two of which I am part of, the first and the last. I don't suffer from exilitis as a condition. Saying they, and the 76 generation in particular, and that leadership, were relevant and important for us then, but that now they're in the way and they're doing everything that is dangerous. And of course, the corruption, the rampant, unmitigated corruption that is evident. And I text that as I was sitting here to a few of the groups that I belong to, and they quite vary, from ex-political prisoners through Black consciousness to Save Our Democracy to the 70s group, that group of young people, essentially Steve Biko's colleagues and proteges, if you like, who Mandela described as the felt fire, the fire that erupted in this country like a felt fire. And I thought about this Sunday where we had a session, online session, with the Soweto Action Committee members. Seth Mazibuko, who was vice chair to Tsietsi Mashinini, Sbongile Mamtembu Mkabela, who yesterday got a Légion d'honneur award from the French, Baby Chawa, who's a psychologist like me and who's acting CEO in Parliament, and who, to her credit, before she became the acting CEO, got 6 consecutive clean audits from the Auditor General. And Thabo Ndabeni, who was in the leadership then and continues to be an activist. And they're a mixed group in that some have been in government, but the majority have not. And I also think about the humility that those who truly sacrificed actually have. And if there's one message I can leave with you is remain humble and true to your purpose. Do not, wherever you stand, however high you may be, lose touch with your connectedness with those around you. Families, colleagues, friends, and importantly, that community that actually has been disrupted in the terrible sense, not in the sense that Neo and others have spoken about here, but in the terrible sense where it's been fractured. Actually, we don't have community in our country. I also am struck by how all of you are totally enthused by what you're doing. And for that, I commend and salute you. It is something ineffable if what you have a passion for, you become, you invest in, and you shape others around you. In this country in particular, and during this COVID pandemic, we've seen more of it. There's basically, and I'm going to be very simplistic in some of my analyses, that you have takers, this bell-shaped curve. You have takers, you have givers, and the rest of us in between, the majority. However, significantly in South Africa, and there's always this exceptionalism about South Africa, total exceptionalism. We the unique case. You know, in the anti-apartheid era, we the unique case. In the democratic era, we the unique case. In corruption, we the unique case. And terribly in eating our own, in destroying our offspring, in being an obstacle to our children. We're a unique case. Hence, the kinds of violence committed against children. I saw a post 2 days ago of a 5-year-old child who was raped in a school in Durban. I recall when I was in a task team looking at child rape, a 2-year-old being raped. How does it happen? And I remember discussing this with a comrade who was a minister. And he was saying, how does it happen that a male can get aroused by a child, a 2-year-old? Then if you look at organized labor, there is no let for newcomers into the workplace. That space is totally controlled. Learnerships were opposed initially. All sorts of self-help activity. Recall a few years ago, we saw young people in Soweto fixing the roads and getting something from drivers in return. You know, a few rand or so, a silver collection, if you like. But the construction companies, who actually are destruction companies, you oppose this because we have the tender. Who are you to do this? And yet, these were the brothers, the sisters, the parents of those children. So there's something warped in our socialization when we treat of our children in that fashion, and all around us. It's there. Oliver mentioned 74% unemployment. We should be terrified that we have that in our country for the majority, and that's young people. In a bizarre definition of youth, the ANC Youth League has 35. What else in the world will you have anybody beyond 25 being regarded as youth? You young adults, you know, and to carry on saying youth, and I know from my son's experience when he was a member of the Youth League, saying they parachute somebody from Limpopo into the branch in this area. And that guy is only interested in tenders. And I remember when the National Youth Commission was appointed by Thabo Mbeki. And immediately they were paid a huge salary. And I thought to myself, the things we used to discuss on Robben Island when we said, when you corrupt your youth, your society has little chance. And that's exactly what's happened. So if you look successively at youth formations, you look at fees must fall, roads must fall, important epochs. Many of us thought this is our spring. Lo and behold, traduced in by the political parties to playing roles, co-opted, and singing the praises and the denialism. You know, besides exilitis we suffer from denialism, because the reality that we see, we refuse to accept. Cognitively, in so many ways, all our perceptions deny those realities. So when my comrade Lindy Sisulu said to you years ago, the so-called born freeze, and I hate that, you know, because it's almost as if the unfree, and it's probably true, imposes this barrier on you, the born frees. She said, we liberated you. Did they liberate us? Did anybody do that? And earlier, many of you spoke, Lindo and others mentioned agency. That is what you have. You have your sense of self. You have your sense of what I want to do and be in this world. And that sense of agency is so very important, because all along the way, it can get seduced, it can get abused, and it can get reduced. And so we see around us the spectacle of crooks being feted. They want their day in court and then don't want their day in court, and people turn out in their numbers. And amongst them, you see a lot of women who end up being abused, literally and otherwise, and you see a lot of young people, part of that, what do they call them, NEET, right? Not in school or something like that. Again, labeling, again, oppressing our children, our offspring, you, our future. And in that, we cannot continue to exist as a society. As I said, we should be terribly afraid when we have the degree of social insecurity and economic uncertainty made worse by the pandemic, exacerbated by ministers and others in power having closed tenders and still not delivering. And a speech we had from our president yesterday almost said nothing except reducing the hours. You know, and so it becomes, I mean, many people say Uncle Cyril is going to do this fireside chat, or Mom Cyril is going to do this kind of thing. Mama in certain languages means uncle, right? Not mother or aunt, right? So when you confront a situation where clearly 200 political parties are registered for the local government elections, you can see that everyone looks at the political kingdom to get rich. And it's unproductive work. You're not producing anything. I'm sure lawyers will say, no, we produce legislations, yes, which nobody bothers about. Wonderful legislation, not operationalized, nobody cares about. And so we trash all that. But government salary bill constitutes 60%. Last year in court, when the unions went to court to oppose the application, 60% of the total budget of this country goes on salaries. And in this pandemic period, all of them got it for doing sweet nothing. So what do we say? We fate them. We're afraid to confront them. And it reminds me of that pall of fear that existed. When I was in matric and I was in the debating society, I mean, I forgot about this until all you guys mentioned what you did and, you know, you in your debating spheres. And when I went to university as a 17-year-old, and there was the debating society, and of course I joined it. And the following year got expelled because I opposed ethnic universities, and lo and behold, I became the last Vice Chancellor of that same institution I opposed at University College, you know. But this is the kind of weird and wonderful place South Africa is, and it can be made better by what you are doing. What you're doing is developing people through your passion, through your skills and your ability and your knowledge you have acquired thus far and which you'll continue to acquire. You in the business of developing minds and developing people. Utterly important. And in whatever they do thereafter, you've developed whole human beings, not non-whites. You know, when you non-something, the terrible othering happens. I cannot call this mobile, this cell phone, a non-flower. I don't describe it, but I'm taking away its essence. I'm taking away its very beingness, its ontology, and what it means to be a human being. I'm actually dehumanizing people when I label people in anything else but in what they should be labeled as. So there's so many ills in our society. There's so many good things happening, and you are amongst the good things. But remember, you can easily be labeled as clever blacks. You can end up with a veritable industry like spin doctoring in our country emerged in the early 2000 period with huge numbers of people doing it because there was a market for it. So zealously guard that space, but create quality assurance so that whatever you are doing stands out from that mediocrity that has become normalized in our society. And do not ignore how you treat anyone, how you treat of the worst amongst us underpins our own claim to being human. Don't look down on persons. Yes, trash them, trash their ideas, but don't play the person, because in that, you lose a sense of your own self. And you should not, when others are doing it, and they will do it to you, they will say, yes, Neo is like this, Tumelo is like that, Umar is like that, Lindo is like that. But respond on the principle and on the issues that you confront. And in what you're doing, I wish you the very best, because heaven knows this country needs more leadership, and a thinking leadership, not the crowd of sloganeering that we have. That's dangerous for any society that's proud of itself. Thank you.
I know this is new for me too. But Dr. Cooper points to, firstly, the various manifestations of abuse that the youth experiences from the older generation. I think one of the biggest ironies of our time was the generation of 1976 shooting at the present generation in the Fees Must Fall protests. But I think this points to what I had mentioned earlier on in the speech, right? The question that we ought to ask, realizing that our government reasonably fails us consistently, right? It's what do we then do where we actually have the privilege to exercise agency to do something? And I hope that you consistently take from the guests that have delivered numerous pieces that firstly, we can use narrative, like Lihakwe tells us, that we can teach South Africa to debate and think better and critically, like Oliver says. We can use litigation, right, like Suhaila showed us, but we can also use our words extensively and create platforms where people get to access all of the skills that helped us to do exactly all that the previous speakers have shown, which is exactly what, again, Think Uhuru captures so perfectly in the present, in status quo. And so with that, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Cooper, for that amazing speech and account, and then to proceed to welcome Neo to do two things. Firstly, prove that seasoned debaters will always just resurface behind the podium when you never really expect it. But secondly, to also discuss just briefly, or rather very appreciatingly, on the COJ, the City of Johannesburg, and proceed to be the first director among all of them to tell us about the projects that Think Uhuru is going to be embarking on as a means to achieve the vision that they have already narrated to us. Neo, you're welcome, sir.
So I'm just going to try and keep this as brief as possible. With regards to the City of Johannesburg, we were looking for a strategic partner that could do three things for us. The first one was the ability to facilitate a discussion in a venue that was, ventilated. If I'm being completely honest, it was genuinely a struggle. But then the second thing as well was just about finding, with the greatest sincerity, an organization, company, or government that has the same intentions as we do to empower young people. The City of Johannesburg currently has a budget of around 2.8% that is focused specifically towards social development. That is the highest for any other municipality in South Africa. It is also strategically one of the 50 biggest metropolitans in the world. So the level of impact that we can actually reach by partnering with the City of Johannesburg is second to none. And we believe that it is an opportunity for us to open and extend our arm towards creating partnerships with people in and around Johannesburg. While it is a vibrant city and it is a city filled with young people, it is also a city of deep inequality. It is a city that is beaming with opportunity and potential. What we're trying to account, therefore, is the leveraging of our own skills with the City of Johannesburg's opportunities. This is but one of the first opportunities that we're trying with the city of Johannesburg. We've spoken to the councillor, Egnam Klina, who's the MMC for Social Development. We've been in conversations with the city manager as well, and we work closely with Brenda Mwana-Gwena, who was working closely around this project. They're not here because they have other projects in and around Orange Farm and Soweto, but in absentia, I really want to say thank you for their cooperation. They've been nothing more than just gracious and helpful, and we look forward to more conversations, as is already happening at the moment, on how we can work with them going forward. Thank you. I think we'll just take it to Linda after this thing. Cool, thanks.
Okay, being very respectful of time, I'll just like to quickly then call upon Umar to come and proceed with discussing the projects that the team is going to be embarking on, and for him to then give us a vote of thanks thereafter.
Yeah, so hello again. I think importantly, before I begin, we've been up to date involved, or part of the teams that have brought you individually the biggest debating open in Africa, the largest and most accessible tournament outside of the World Championship, but also some of the most diverse championships. And I think that's really important to us. Because of the spaces we've been to and the spaces we've grown up in, we have a unique, and we feel a unique obligation to make these spaces continually grow and better, right? So here we talk about places like our universities, our high schools, and very much the city that we call home. Importantly, the two overarching principles that are most important to us are those of access and excellence. These are the things that we principally hope to embody, and we hope that in the past we have used. So with that in mind, and because we are after all a business, the three respective portfolios, that being public speaking, leadership and development, as well as debate, will have the following key events. And these are only the beginning, right, for us. These are the sort of the next calendar year. And so I'm hoping to just give you a little bit of insight into these initiatives and how we plan to move forward as Think Uhuru. So immediately, or rather our immediate event after our launch is our Women's Day Public Speaking Invitational. Again, don't worry, the irony is not lost on us that we're three men who are planning this event. However, we have placed a significant amount of onus and planning to make sure this is an event that will firstly be managed by individuals who that it seeks to engage in a productive manner. We, again, are an institution that is committed to addressing spaces where we see significant inequality, and that's why this initiative is one that is so incredibly important to us and is our first event and will be our first public engagement in the public speaking space and our flagship event in that space. Moving on, one of our most exciting initiatives and what I think is going to be the largest debate league that South Africa and Southern Africa has ever seen, I'd like to present the Uhuru Schools National Debating League. We aim to not only involve, as has been the case up until this point, individual provinces leading to championships, but the entirety of South Africa, and we've already engaged key stakeholders in the rest of Southern Africa, as well as the greater African continent. The onus here specifically is co-opting our unique experience in establishing what has been up until this point the precedent in online debating through using innovative platforms like TabbyCat and all of these these upcoming technologies, right? We're going to provide a space for young learners to engage with everyone from a diverse group of background. Specifically, the difference between this and everything else is the onus is on development of individuals who cannot speak English as their first language, who don't have the ability and access to high-level training and coaches. This initiative has a number of accessibility functions that we will hope to pioneer and engage, and this event will be launching in July. Moving forward then, we have our first international collaboration. We're partnering with the Association of International Debate in Spanish to bring the first bilingual digital moot competition that the world has ever seen. We're also partnering with the University of the Witwatersrand, the University of Computation in Madrid, and the University of El Salvador to bring what will be, hopefully, the largest online moot court event happening both in Spanish and in English. Again, facilitating communications between developing nations and individuals from across the world, which we feel is one of our greatest obligations. The next is our flagship event for the leadership and development portfolio, right, or division. It's the Uhuru Thinker Symposium. This is specifically a an initiative that we've wanted to undertake for the longest time. We hope to highlight key stakeholders and unique African voices and empower them with a unique platform to engage and be engaged with. We hope that this follows the format that has been pioneered by debating universities across the globe as these armchair discussions, and we hope that these will be firstly diverse, but also also creating a specific value on engaging young South Africans, which we see up until this point haven't had a tremendous ability to have their voices heard. That is our flagship event for the leadership and development portfolio. We're then moving to what is our flagship event for the debate program. This is one of the projects that in my lifetime I'm most proud of. It is a partnership that we have with the Royal Pact Debating Academy out of Zimbabwe. It is, again, up until this point, been the largest debating championship outside of the world's university debate championship. But it differs in two key aspects. Firstly, like you've heard all of the very, very well-seasoned debaters here, it is completely free. And yes, while it is online currently, we do have plans to bring it into the physical space in the future. But more importantly, it also engages in outside of the traditional mechanisms that has stopped speakers getting to these spaces. Again, the onus on here is to allow people who speak English as a foreign language, English as a second language, to be recognized. That's why it is called a world championship. This is not something in debating you generally take lightly, and is why we believe very much in the sentiment of Uhuru, and we believe that partnering that with the world championship aspect will yield what will continue to be the largest debating championship in the world and our flagship event for the debate portfolio. So that sort of brings us to the end of our presentation of our projects. I'm going to now move quickly into a vote of thanks because, again, as debaters, we try to be cognizant of time. So I'm going to give a short vote of thanks, and then we'll have a short break. We still would like to have the question and answer session. So if you'd like it, if you have any questions, if you could just jot those down for the people who are watching online. If you could also just drop them in the comment spaces on the respective platforms. We'll have about a 5-minute break while we allow the speakers to come up, and then we'll move to that section or that portion of the program. So moving swiftly into a vote of thanks. We would obviously like to thank the City of Johannesburg for their continued support and partnership. We'd like to thank namely Martin Labia, Brenda, Consular Eunice, and Portia. Then we'd go on to continue to thank individuals like Maheshwari and Anura Pereira for their continued support, Masia Bakas, Mahlatsi Makhao, Linda Gutle Mabaso, Hamida and Nivaria Naidu, Busi Mkubuzi Poor, Sivi Govender, Joshua Pike, Kate Bohr, Gladness Mosweu, and all the friends of Think Uhuru. Even if we haven't mentioned by name, we are definitely the product of the spaces that have grown us, and we hope to, in time, better these spaces. I'd like to just pass a quick thank specifically to our speakers. Again, Sohela, who had to go away to get back to the fight for continued change in South Africa. I'd like to thank Oliver, who I count as one of the juggernauts that came out of the Wits Debating Union and someone I personally benefit from the legacy of that institution. I'd like to thank Lehakwe. My favorite memory of Lehakwe was her being the leadership and the protest at the World University Debating Championship. She is by far one of the strongest debaters to ever represent Africa in any stage, and we're incredibly privileged to have her here today. And of course, Dr. Sats Cooper, who I've known my entire life, but I'm continually impressed at, firstly, the humbleness of a man who is so pivotal to the struggle of our nation, but also continually engages in a beneficial manner. So thank you to all of you. We'll now move to a short break while we allow the speakers to come forward. Again, please drop any questions and submit them online, and we'll then move to the Q&A session. Thank you again on behalf of Think Uhuru and everyone here.
Hello, my name is Don, first time speaker, long time fan. My comment, I think it's a question more to the Uhuru, so I'm directing this at Neo. I've heard a lot of communist talk up there today, and I know we enjoy it as a former debater myself. We enjoy the practicality of it, and we enjoy thinking of like the possible outcomes where we don't have to be evil capitalists in order to enact a lot of change, right? But the pool of people that you have, the pool of people that generally go into debating, the particular skill set that is debating is a incredibly valuable asset. Like it's an intangible valuable, and you can mold the chemistry student like Oliver into a political analyst, right? You can mold a Lehakwe, right, into someone who goes into corporate and still finds her feet. Does Uhuru think that it's going to be going towards more like an entrepreneurial project, something like that? Things like, the digital precinct down the road, Simolo Hong, that's run by Wits, or things like that. Things that help culture a more effective capitalism, if that's a thing, so that we don't have to completely sacrifice our goals in order for us to not be capitalists.
Is this one? Okay. I don't have to pick it up. Oh, sorry. Interestingly, this was a conversation that we had 2 days ago. We were really exploring what kind of company do we want to be. And it's been a conversation actually we've had for 3 years, because this is a conception we spoke about in 2018. I think what you're asking is really two questions. The first one is, what is the ideological persuasion of our company? And then the second one is, in the short to medium term, what do we intend to do with our company? And how are we going to partner with other people? To be quite honest with you, debaters and critical thinkers should be allowed to have the moral and political flexibility to have whatever political persuasion. It is more for us about coinciding people with our values, and those values are non-negotiable because we believe that they're inherent to any business. And these could include, for instance, the idea of wanting to participate simply because you want to be a better thinker, because you want to be someone who's sharpened enough by the realities of society. We can have, in many ways, different ideas of how we want to solve societal issues. But I think it's more important about, what's more important is about helping someone refine their own political persuasion. I'm sitting next to Lehakwe right now, and I've known her for many years as well. She's always said that she's a persuaded communist, right? But that doesn't mean that she's consigned those political beliefs. She's consigned those political beliefs away, because you can still moderate political persuasion versus whatever you want to be. And for us, I think, because we're in the nature of training people to think and in the nature of development of human beings, it would be a shame for us to actually do that. And the second thing as well is, like, are we going to become a company like Wits Simolochong that will focus, for instance, on IT and tech, transferable skills, etc.? The reason why we've divided the company into 3 main units is simply because we think we can optimize in the big gaps that exist in skills development. So debating in and of itself is a gap. Public speaking in and of itself is a gap. In leadership and development, we're going to be pursuing B2B partnerships with organizations like Wits Simolochong, like We Think Code, for instance, where hundreds and thousands of girls could be trained for things like coding, software development, etc., etc. So we do not have the inherent resources to do that, right? Someone studied construction, I studied economics, he studies politics. What can you do? We're not comp-sci developers. But what we will do, though, is leverage whatever networks that we have to ensure that we can create models for those people to participate in them. That's absolutely critical. We're not going to achieve anything if for the long to medium term we just focus on debating and public speaking. That's very true. But what we're trying to do with this model is to edify what already exists in the space. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Newo. I'm seeing that Lehak was also noting something. Could it be that you would also like to add to the question?
No, it's just...
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to also then give somebody else an opportunity to perhaps ask a question, make commentary. Okay, I think we can proceed to engage the questions online. Yes. Lovely.
So yeah, there are a number of questions that have come through to the people who are watching online. So I'm just gonna read a couple of them, and hopefully you guys can engage them as needed. Unfortunately, a lot of them aren't addressed to a specific person, so hopefully you can all weigh in. The first one is a general question: is there a lack of critical thinking skills in South Africa? And I mean, here I think we can pass it around a little bit, or if there's anyone who'd like to start us off.
Yes.
Okay, Olo.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, obviously, yes. I think it's people only think as far as what they're conditioned to think. So I think a certain type of person, so if you went to a private school, you grew up in Houghton, you go to Wits, you get a job at like Bain or something, you don't really, and I think it's a personal experience thing when you do encounter these kinds of people, is that you don't really think outside of yourself, and you think that critical thinking is just, being able to do well in your interview, being able to provide advice to a big corporate. So I think there is definitely a lack of critical thinking, just in the sense of, we all exist in silos, and people rarely think outside of themselves and outside of their own frame of mind that they've been conditioned to think in.
So oftentimes we conflate critical thinking for problem solving. Those two things are not exactly the same. In this country, we focus on creating problem solvers, not necessarily critical thinkers. Yeah. People solve problems that works to their convenience, but inadvertently, oftentimes surreptitiously create additional problems for other people. Where I come from, I went to school in Randfontein, and I went to Randfontein High School. And if anyone here knows anything about Randfontein, you'll know that it's a small mining town on the west of Johannesburg, west of Gauteng. And we have a mine dumping crisis there. So how many gold used to mine there? You now have Sibanye running massive operations there, stretching all the way to Western area. And one of the problems that they had to fix quite early on into the 2000s was I don't know the technical term, but the mine dust problem. A lot of people tested positive for cancer. The air was just dirty, and it's an industrious area. If you know companies like Bismarck, for instance, the biggest bus-making company in the country is located there, and that sort of thing. So the air was just really, really, really dirty. And to solve that problem, what they decided to do was to bypass the Rand water reservoir, take water from there, sprinkle it over the mine dust so that it doesn't blow into the air when it's a windy day, and somehow process that water back into the system to be cleaned, and it caused a dirty water crisis. Didn't affect the mine owners because they don't live there. They got into their SUVs and drove off at the end of the day, right? Didn't affect the mine managers, none of that. And so they solved the problem for their own bottom line and are lauded as problem solvers and innovators in the mining space, but ended up creating problems for us, right? So there you can clearly see problem solving is not critical thinking, right? Because critical thinking would not have had a blind sight on that. And so in this country, we need to shift our attention towards towards critical thinking based problem solving. And I'm hoping that's where you guys can take this business and your value proposition and make a lot of money of it. Make tons, bags, many bags. Because Don, profit seeking is not the antithesis of communism. You can be communist and a profiteer at the same time. So you'll make lots and lots of money and share with us.
Very clearly, we lack critical thinking because we have, from a Bantu education, Vervoedian system, which said, what does the Bantu need above
being, in certain forms of labor. There's no need for maths, for instance. We have actually, in democracy, dumbed down, and we've succeeded where Vervoet failed. So, how can you have a 30-something% pass? How can any institute, you pass medicine with a 50% pass? That means you 50% fail. So the quest for excellence, the ability to get there requires critical thinking. It does not require this compliant, the Yabasism has been changed to, oh, comrade, and Kiarata ANC or something like that. And it blinds you to the reality of the problems we confront that requires critical insight. And if you listen to the 15 months of mismanaging this pandemic, it says that we've not had an informed basis. There are excellent people out there who can do it, and not necessarily medical doctors, but others, but we don't use them in the vaccination campaign or in the campaign to spread the message on what people should do. And very simply, making masks available for people which they cannot afford. Our people barely eke out an existence daily. How are they going to afford these kinds of things that you and I wear? So it's a monstrous, complex mixture that requires insightful abilities, vision, and that can only come if you think critically of in terms of what you can do. If you cannot, you carry on limping from disaster after disaster, like Oliver has mentioned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. I think a very interesting thing to also note is the different engagements in different markets with avenues that teach critical thinking skills. We happen to have in the auditorium with us Eric Kazadi, who has the privilege of both being a teacher, a coach in the debating space in South Africa, as well as in a broader international community. And I'd just like Eric to briefly tell us of the contrast in engagement with these different avenues, and I think perhaps why Uhuru uniquely has value in this particular context.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And I'll try to be brief. I wasn't prepared for this, but yeah. So I would just firstly like to draw on what Lehakwes just mentioned about how people are socialized to think, and you are a product of the environment and what you're told to think about. So I do a lot of debating, I do a lot of schools coaching as well. And recently I've started working with the advent of online debating and things like that. I work with organizations and startups in China, India, and that sort of thing. And I think internationally, something that I think South Africa is sort of lagging behind with is understanding the importance of debating, and also of just critical thinking and understanding how to engage and be a knowledgeable and well-rounded individual beyond just whatever field of study that you want to go into. So, for example, I work with kids as young as 9 years old, being taught the skills of critical thinking and debating and articulation, English second language speakers, but the parents place a particular importance on it, because for them it's a gateway towards everything that they wish to achieve. And I think you see that reflected in terms of economic growth that the countries are experiencing. I think you see that in terms of how many children end up going to getting admittance into Ivy Leagues and those sort of greater universities. It's because from a very young age, there is an importance in terms of cultivating your ability to think beyond your immediate environment and the ability to engage with the world around you that I hope that Think Uhuru is likely to impart onto South African children and the youth going forward, because I do think it is instrumental and the value of it can't be overstated.
Thank you so much, Eric. What actually prompted me to invite him into the conversation was realizing that for the most part, we tend to engage with these kind of conversations with respect to what we're doing in this generation and age group going forward. But the truth is, these skills are perhaps most valuable when we begin to hone them at a much earlier stage. And South Africa has been a bit delayed in giving that appreciation, from how they pay coaches to how much debating is perceived, or how big of an opportunity debating is perceived to give individuals access to. That said, I would like to then proceed to the next question from the online platforms. Back to you.
Right, fantastic. This one I think would be greatly, it would be great if Dr. Kupak and Lehakwe could obviously engage this one, or anyone who feels that they have some input. Is discourse an adequate vehicle in aiding protest movements in gaining progress? So yeah, is discourse an adequate vehicle in aiding protest movements gaining progress?
Not enough. Discourse is important, but to have social movements need content. And often what we have is the form more than the content, and that's why good organizations end up merely sloganeering afterwards. So you need to engage, you need to have that critical insight into what the issues are that you confront, and create a plank on which to put out the messages one seeks to put out. And unfortunately, there's a whole string of things that one needs to do. We end up often in this country merely mouthing shibboleths, slogans, and if you can end up in the highest place in this country, Parliament, and you sloganeer there, then it tells you how deep that problem is.
Just to add to that, I think, again, discourse is obviously very important. And I think just from a fees must fall perspective, I think that a lot of the time what happened, I think, to a lot of us was that we were more encouraged to, speak and engage rather than, burn tires and run from the police. But what really got the attention of people was, actual action, was, vandalizing, but not vandalizing, we spray painted names on buildings. But, that action, I think, really does drive the discourse. But I think importantly, like Dr. Sats says, is that what the product of that is what's more important. And I can say from the University of the Free State, I think two important things happened for us after fees must fall, is that we were able to finally table the language policy being changed from, being bilingual, that went all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal. And although I think, when I left, the university was still teaching bilingually, it was something that had started to phase in. And I think secondly was that up until 2018, the University of the Free State didn't have a sexual harassment policy. And I think a lot of the feminists that were part of Fees Must Fall at the University of the Free State were pivotal in ensuring that policy not only finally became tabled at council, but was actually enacted in that same year. So I think that, playing both sides, which is, if you're a student at an Afrikaans university where you don't really have a lot of power, it is important to protest. It is very important to disrupt classes. It is very important, to shut down the campus, because that's what gets you the attention. But I think it is more important that the cost of protest, which is people getting expelled and people getting arrested, does have actual results it does have results after that. So definitely the substance is very important.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for that. We then have a question. Chimamanda said that there is a danger in a single story. Would any of you agree with that?
I don't want to agree with Chimamanda on the record.
All right, cool. I think there are one or two more questions here that I think we can engage before we bring it to an end, just because we're running a little bit over time. Here, the question is, what do you think are some of the struggle that the youth in South Africa face today that can be engaged through critical thinking?
Jobs.
We need money.
So one of the things debating teaches you is a thinking skill called first principled thinking, where you try to drill down really to the problem, to the core of the problem, and solve it from the bottom up. And in South Africa, we don't have a jobs problem, we've got a poverty problem, right? Because how many people would actively be looking for jobs if their most basic needs, how many people would complain about not having a job if their most basic needs were taken care of, if they had food, shelter, and all else that we spend our lives spending our bags for. And for instance, through critical thinking, you can come to the realization that the idea of having a job is kind of becoming outdated, simply because of just how automated the entire world is becoming around everything. So how then do you solve the poverty crisis created by joblessness? You solve the poverty crisis, right? And so part of solving the poverty crisis, I was discussing with a tech company that I'm advising on what the future looks like. And I said to them, you guys need to think 50 years ahead and ask yourself what your organization will be doing in the world 50 years from now. 50 years from now, people really wouldn't be working as much because everything will be automated. And so governments will start having the conversation of an automation tax or an automation levy, for instance. If Anglo-American decided, yeah, we're going to lay off every mine worker we have because every mine worker we have can be replaced by a machine, sure, go ahead. But then tax every machine's workman power to the extent that the taxes from there can give those furloughed mine workers a meaningful life where they don't have to be hungry, uneducated, cold in winter, and without a home, right? And then you've solved the poverty crisis. Then you don't have to bust your head about a jobs crisis. So that's the relationship between, I think, critical thinking and the contemporary problems of young people, and the gap between the two.
I think that we have an aging and failed leadership who cannot think beyond the immediate, and that immediate, unfortunately, is mixed with their self-interest and those around them. So we need a change in leadership, and to have that, we need a better education, and we need what you're offering in Think Uhuru, because you've put there think, because it's almost as if thinking is illegal. That you shouldn't be thinking, because we will think for you. We ask not what you can do, but what we can do for you, and we do nothing in those positions of power. So the dependency continues and increases to the detriment of each of us, so that we successively creating lost dependent generations. When I asked the question in the early 80s, are we creating a lost generation? People were up in arms and so on. We've created successive lost generations because of the paucity of education, and education opening your minds. Instead, what we've been doing is we're looking at education as a functionalist. It's a commodification. So if you want to become a lawyer, we'll teach you law. If you want to become an X, we'll teach you that. But teach you about yourself, your world, and others around you, no, it doesn't exist. So in this immediate discoverable age, when you can press something on your device and you can come to instant knowledge, we should be, as Oliver concluded, we should be actually thinking about how do we make people important and self-sustainable based on their needs, rather than this simple thing, jobs, here's X, here's Y, we'll do a simple thing and we'll create, or we'll hold a conference and we'll carry on with conferencing and conferencing and conferencing, and nothing else comes out of it because the people in those conferences hog everything for themselves. So we need to actually get better leadership, and there's no reason why you as young people should not grasp leadership. So that agency, that gap exists, and the quest for excellence, restoring the humanity in this country, flying this flag high, hopefully by the 30th anniversary of our democracy, so that the failure does not continue apace.
All right, thank you to all the speakers for that. I think Neo wants to contribute something there as well. Okay, no. Thank you again for all of the speakers. I'm now going to invite Jamila to pass on a token of our sincere appreciation. And I would like to close off the event on behalf of Uhuru. Thank you for everyone who's watching online. I would like to invite all of you before you leave to get what is a small token of our appreciation to all of you in some breakfast bags. So yeah, thank you everyone. And that brings us to the end of our program.
I'm glad you did not choose scorched earth.